Tonight, we drift back to a time when the world moved at a slower, more deliberate pace, a time when the rhythm of life was intrinsically entwined with the turning of the seasons. Perhaps you are settling into a favorite armchair, or perhaps you are already nestled beneath a warm blanket, as we begin our journey into the quiet preparations for winter, long before the glow of electricity illuminated our homes. Please, make yourself entirely comfortable, dim the lights if you wish, and allow yourself to simply be. If you find this gentle exploration comforting, you might consider offering a like or subscribing for more such evenings. As the opulent hues of autumn softened and then faded, as the last crimson and gold leaves relinquished their hold on branches, a profound stillness began to settle over the land. It was a silence unlike any other, not the vibrant quiet of a summer afternoon, but a deep, resonant hush that spoke of impending change. The air itself seemed to grow heavier, carrying with it a distinct chill, a subtle intimation of the rigorous months ahead. This palpable quiet was a signal, an unmistakable harbinger that winter, in all its stark majesty, was poised to descend. For families living centuries ago, and indeed for many well into the 19th century and beyond, this approaching silence was not merely an aesthetic shift in the landscape, but a deeply practical, almost spiritual call to action. It marked the commencement of a crucial period, an intense and comprehensive cycle of preparation, spanning weeks and even months, all meticulously orchestrated to ensure not just comfort, but fundamental survival through the long, dark, and often perilous months that lay ahead. There was no casual indifference to the coming cold, instead, there was an ingrained understanding, passed down through generations, that neglect in these final weeks of autumn could carry severe, even fatal, consequences. The very fabric of daily life began to subtly shift, with every task, every chore, every gathering of resources, imbued with the weighty purpose of preparing for winter's unyielding embrace. The land itself seemed to hold its breath, the fields lying fallow and stripped bare, the trees standing sentinel with skeletal limbs against an increasingly stark sky. The sounds, too, were transforming. The chirping exuberance of summer birds had diminished, replaced by perhaps the occasional caw of a crow or the rustle of dry leaves skittering across cleared ground. Even the light seemed to take on a different quality, softer, lower in the sky, carrying less warmth, and retreating earlier with each passing day. It was a visual and sensory narrative that left no doubt regarding the season's inexorable progression. This sense of looming quietude permeated not just the natural world, but also the very atmosphere within the homes themselves. Conversations might have taken on a more serious, focused tone, planning the allocation of tasks, discussing the state of the stores, and anticipating potential needs. Children, too, absorbed this seriousness, understanding without explicit instruction that the coming months demanded careful stewardship and collective effort. Their play, perhaps, became a little more contained, a little closer to home, mirroring the inward turn of the season. The very air carried the scent of wood smoke, becoming more insistent as hearths were kindled with greater regularity, a fragrant signal of warmth and domesticity against the increasing chill. This scent, curling upwards from chimneys, was a communal acknowledgment, a shared truth across the scattered homesteads and villages that the battle against the cold was about to truly begin. Each wisp of smoke was a tiny plume of defiance, a testament to human ingenuity and resilience. In the quiet contemplation of these changes, families understood that their well-being, their sustenance, and their very lives depended on their diligence during this transitional interlude. There were no shortcuts, no quick fixes, no convenient substitutions for thorough preparation. The shelves of modern supermarkets, brimming with a global array of foodstuffs regardless of season, were an unimaginable luxury. Instead, every family was a self-sustaining unit, or part of a tightly knit community that relied on its collective foresight and labor. The approaching silence, therefore, was not merely a passive state, but an active command. It was a call to gather, to mend, to store, to secure. It spoke of the earth preparing for its long slumber, and of humanity mirroring that profound cycle, hunkering down, drawing inwards, and meticulously attending to every detail that would ensure their safe passage through the deep freeze. This understanding profoundly shaped the daily routines and the very fabric of existence, imbuing every action with intention and deep significance. One might imagine the family patriarch, perhaps, standing at the doorstep as afternoon faded into early dusk, his gaze sweeping over the fields, assessing the last of the harvest, listening to the very air. He would be sensing the nuanced shift in the breeze, the feel of the ground underfoot, processing a lifetime of inherited knowledge about the weather's caprices. The matriarch, within the home, would be making her own quiet assessments, planning the preserving schedule, counting the remaining stores, ensuring every textile was mended, every candle prepared. The children would assist, carrying wood, sorting dried goods, learning by observing, absorbing the ancient wisdom of winterproofing their lives. This was a world where observation was paramount, where minute changes in the natural environment were read like open books. The thickening coat of squirrels, the southward migration of birds, the subtle shifts in cloud formations, the sharpness of the morning frost, all were pieces of a puzzle, interpreted to gauge the severity and timing of winter's arrival. It was a symbiotic relationship between humanity and nature, a delicate dance of anticipation and response, where knowing the signs was as critical as knowing the tasks. The looming silence, then, was a profound and multifaceted phenomenon. It was the visual quiet of a landscape stripped bare, the auditory quiet of diminishing natural sounds, and the internal quiet of a community bracing itself. But beneath this surface stillness, there hummed a vibrant, urgent energy, a focused determination that characterized this crucial period of preparation. It was the prelude to months of deep endurance, where every stored bushel, every stacked log, every mended garment represented a tangible measure of survival, a testament to foresight, ingenuity, and the enduring human spirit in the face of nature's formidable power. And as the last leaves fell, the collective breath was held, waiting for the first flakes of snow to confirm that winter had, indeed, arrived. Tonight, we shall settle into the soft embrace of history, allowing the gentle currents of time to carry us back to an era when nature's rhythms dictated the pace of life, and the ingenuity of families illuminated the darkest nights. As you find your most comfortable position, perhaps dimming the ambient light just so, let us explore the quiet perseverance of those who weathered winters long before the hum of electricity entered our homes. If, by the soft glow of our shared journey, you find a moment of peace, a quiet warmth emanating from these tales, a gentle tap of the like button or a soft subscribe would be a most welcome whisper of appreciation, but for now, simply relax and let the words unfold around you. As the days shortened and the northern winds began to whisper their icy promises around the eaves, the true center of family life, the very core of their winter survival, solidified within the sturdy masonry of the hearth. This was no mere architectural feature, it was a breathing, radiating presence, the unchallenged heart of the home, its warm glow a beacon against the encroaching chill. Around this sacred space, the daily rhythms of domestic existence pulsed with quiet determination, each activity a testament to human resilience in the face of nature's formidable power. Imagine, if you will, the rich, earthy scent of wood smoke, a fragrance that permeated every corner of the dwelling, clinging to woolen garments, to woven blankets, to the very timbers of the house itself. It was the scent of safety, the perfume of protection against the biting air that lurked just beyond the sturdy wooden door. The fireplace, constructed of local stone or brick, often with a broad, welcoming mantelpiece above, was a masterpiece of necessity and humble craftsmanship. Its capacious opening, sometimes wide enough to encompass a small bench or two, invited proximity, encouraging families to gather close, to share not just its warmth but also the intimacy of shared stories and quiet companionship. Within its flickering embrace, myriad tasks unfolded. The most primary, of course, was the provision of warmth, a steady, sustaining heat that pushed back against the invasive cold. In the deepest clutches of winter, the fire would burn continuously, its embers glowing softly through the night, banked carefully to preserve their precious heat for the morning's rekindling. Early mornings would see someone, perhaps the paterfamilias or a diligent older child, coaxing fresh life from the banked ashes, the gentle crackle and pop of new wood-catching flame a comforting prelude to the day. The warmth from the hearth radiated outwards, slowly permeating the thick stone walls, turning them from icy barriers into reservoirs of gentle heat. Those closest to the fire would feel its direct embrace, a soothing warmth on chilled skin, while those further away would benefit from the milder, ambient temperature it artfully maintained throughout the main living space. But the hearth's utility stretched far beyond mere thermal comfort. It was, first and foremost, the culinary engine of the household, a bustling kitchen in miniature. Suspended over the dancing flames, either from a sturdy trammel hook or slowly rotating from a spit, kettles of water would perpetually simmer, providing a continuous supply of warm water for drinks, for washing, for countless small necessities. Cast iron pots, heavy and black with years of seasoning, would hang directly over the fire or rest on trivets within its glowing coals, slow-cooking stews and porridges, their aromas mingling with the wood smoke to create an irresistible symphony of sustenance. Baking, too, was an art perfected by the hearth. Bread might be baked in a Dutch oven nestled in the coals or in a smaller, dedicated bread oven built into the side of the chimney, its residual heat turning simple dough into golden loaves, their crusts crisp, their interiors soft and yielding. The rhythmic stir of a wooden spoon, the gentle hiss of a boiling pot, the subtle scent of baking grains, these were the daily auditory and olfactory accompaniments to the hearth's ceaseless work. Beyond cooking, the hearth served as a crucial drying station. In an era without modern conveniences, the daily chores of washing clothing, linens, and even sometimes smaller harvested goods, presented a considerable challenge during the relentless damp and cold of winter. Wet garments, hung precariously on clothes horses or draped over wooden racks positioned carefully near the fire, would slowly release their moisture into the warm air. The rising heat carried away the dampness, leaving fabrics soft and ready for wear once more. Boots and shoes, slick with melting snow or damp from outdoor excursions, found a restorative warmth by the hearth, drying slowly and preventing the chill from setting into their materials. Even medicinal herbs, gathered in sunnier seasons, might find their final drying stage in the gentle warmth above the mantelpiece, preserving their potency for winter ailments. The gentle glow of the flames offered the primary source of illumination once daylight faded, casting dancing shadows upon the walls and ceiling. Around this ever-present light, families would gather for communal activities that bound them together. Children would complete their studies or engage in quiet games, their faces illuminated by the shifting light. Women would sit with their mending and spinning, the rhythmic whir of a spinning wheel a soft counterpoint to the crackle of the burning logs, their skilled fingers deftly transforming raw wool into yarn. Men might carve wood, mend tools, or simply sit in thoughtful silence, perhaps tending to the fire, ensuring its steady flame. This communal space fostered connection, providing a natural setting for storytelling, for the sharing of worries and joys, for the quiet unfolding of familial bonds. The hearth was not merely a source of heat, it was the sacred keeper of memories, the silent witness to generations of lives lived within its comforting embrace. It provided a literal warmth that chased away the physical cold, but it also offered a psychological warmth, a feeling of security and togetherness, that was equally vital for enduring the long, dark days of winter. Its rhythmic crackle and glow were constants, anchors in a world of stark seasonal changes, a testament to the enduring power of a simple fire to sustain life and nurture the human spirit. The chill in the air, a certain crispness that deepened with each passing day, served as a potent, unspoken reminder of the work that lay ahead. It was a familiar seasonal rhythm, one understood deeply by generations who depended on their own hands for survival. Long before the first whisper of frost transformed dew into delicate crystals on the windowpanes, families began their monumental task, a demanding dance with the forest that secured the very warmth of their hearths. This task, often beginning in the gentle, fading light of autumn, encompassed far more than simply felling a tree. It was a carefully orchestrated endeavor, requiring foresight, strength, and the collaborative spirit of every able body within the household. The sheer volume of wood needed to sustain a family through the long, unforgiving months of winter was truly staggering, a constant, tangible presence in their thoughts. Imagine, if you will, the ceaseless demand of a roaring fire, day and night, consuming logs with an insatiable appetite, a hunger that had to be met with relentless purpose. The selection of trees themselves was a skill passed down through quiet observation and practical experience. Not just any wood would do. Hardwoods, like oak and maple, were prized for their density and slow, consistent burn, offering long-lasting heat. Softwoods, such as pine and fir, while burning more quickly, were useful for kindling or for a quick surge of warmth when needed. The seasoned woodcutter, often the patriarch or a strong, experienced son, would walk the forest, his eyes scanning the canopy, assessing the health of trunks, listening to the subtle creaks and groans of the ancient trees for clues. He knew which trees were ready, which ones, once felled, would split cleanly and season properly, yielding the dry, efficient fuel so desperately required. Felling a tree with hand tools was an art form in itself, a symphony of controlled effort and precision. The ringing clang of the axe, echoing through the quiet woods, was a definitive sound of autumn. Each swing was carefully aimed, muscles tensing and releasing in a methodical rhythm. The sharp blade bit into the wood, showering chips onto the forest floor, a growing pile framing the advancing cut. First, a notch was crafted on the side where the tree was intended to fall, a guiding cut to provide direction. Then, on the opposite side, the felling cut began, slowly deepening until, with a final, protesting groan, the massive trunk would begin its slow, majestic descent, shaking the ground as it crashed down. This was a moment of both triumph and danger, requiring alertness and respect for the sheer power of nature. Once the tree was on the ground, the work was far from over. The branches had to be carefully removed, a process known as limbing. These smaller limbs, though not suitable for the main fire, were often gathered for kindling, or for burning in outdoor fires for specific tasks. Then came the task of bucking, sawing the long trunks into manageable lengths. A crosscut saw, often operated by two people, sawing back and forth in a synchronized motion, would sing its way through the wood. The rhythmic hiss and pull, the sawdust accumulating in fragrant piles, marked the slow transformation of raw timber into usable logs. The effort was immense, shoulders aching, hands often sore and calloused, but the focus remained unwavering, a shared commitment to the approaching cold. Splitting the logs was another significant endeavor, a test of strength and technique. A splitting maul, its heavy head and wedge-shaped blade, was wielded with powerful swings, aiming for the grain of the wood. The satisfying thwack as the maul bit into the log, the slow widening of the crack, and then the triumphant pop as the two halves separated, was a small victory with each piece. This process not only made the wood easier to handle and stack, but it also exposed more surface area to the air, aiding in the crucial process of seasoning. Seasoning, the drying of the wood, was just as vital as the cutting itself. Freshly cut, or green, wood, holds a significant amount of moisture, making it burn inefficiently, producing more smoke and less heat. Therefore, once cut and split, the wood was carefully stacked. Wood piles, neatly arranged near the homestead, sometimes reaching impressive heights, were not merely piles of fuel, they were symbols of diligent preparation, testaments to the family's foresight. These were not random heaps, but purposeful structures, designed to allow air to circulate freely around each piece, carrying away moisture. Often, the stacks were covered on top to protect them from rain and snow, while remaining open on the sides to facilitate the drying process. A well-seasoned log, light for its size and with a distinct, dry sound when struck, was a treasure. The transportation of this harvested bounty was often another significant challenge. Whether it was dragged by hand, laboriously pulled by oxen or horses over rough terrain, or floated down creeks when water levels allowed, each journey was a testament to perseverance. For families without animals, the human back became the primary means of conveyance, carrying heavy loads of wood from the forest edge to the growing woodpile closer to the house. Children, too, played their part, gathering fallen branches and smaller pieces, filling baskets that they would dutifully carry back to the homestead, contributing their small but significant share to the collective effort. The feeling of a full woodshed, brimming with neatly stacked logs, was not merely one of satisfaction, it was a profound sense of security. It was the knowledge that for another winter, the biting winds and relentless snow would be held at bay, at least within the comforting confines of their home. To fail in this immense task, to misjudge the quantity needed, or to be hampered by illness or unforeseen circumstances, meant facing a truly harrowing winter. A home without adequate fuel was a home without warmth, a place where the very breath of life could be threatened by the relentless cold, a prospect that loomed large in the minds of those who lived so intimately with the season's unforgiving demands. The scent of drying wood, the gentle rustle of leaves still clinging to the trees, and the crisp autumn air all spoke of this vital work, a quiet, pervasive understanding that permeated every aspect of their lives. Tonight, we drift back to a simpler time, a quieter world, where the rhythms of life were dictated by the sun's gentle arc and the season's slow turning. Take a moment to adjust your pillows, perhaps lower the lights a touch, and simply allow yourself to sink into the quiet narrative we're about to explore together. If, by the end, you find a measure of peace in these gentle stories, feel free to share your thoughts, or perhaps consider subscribing to our channel for more such tranquil journeys. As the late autumn sun would begin its lower, weaker trajectory across the sky, casting long, pale shadows, a certain quiet urgency would settle over the homestead. The bounty of summer, the vibrant greens and golds of the harvest, had to be carefully gathered, thoughtfully sorted, and then, most crucially, protected. For many families, this protection, this crucial hedge against the lean months ahead, resided in a remarkable, unassuming structure, the root cellar. Imagine for a moment, the ground itself, dark and yielding, becoming a silent partner in preservation. People would dig, with patient hands and a simple spade, a space deep into the earth. Sometimes, this would be a humble pit lined with stone or wood, perhaps tucked beneath a porch or a small outbuilding. Other times, for those with a bit more resourcefulness, it would be a more substantial subterranean room, often with thick, packed dirt walls and a sturdy wooden or stone roof, carefully insulated with straw or dry leaves. The genius of the root cellar lay in its very simplicity, its deep connection to the earth beneath our feet. These underground sanctuaries offered a naturally stable environment, a calm, unwavering embrace against the harsh caprices of winter weather. The earth itself, being an excellent insulator, would maintain a surprisingly consistent temperature, typically hovering just above freezing, often between 35 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit, regardless of the howling winds or biting frosts above. This steady coolness was absolutely vital, a true blessing for keeping perishable goods in their prime. More than just temperature, the earth also provided a naturally humid atmosphere within these subterranean dwellings. This gentle moisture, often around 85 to 95% relative humidity, was crucial for preventing root vegetables and fruits from dehydrating and shriveling. Picture a crisp apple, picked fresh from the tree, gradually losing its vibrant juiciness if left exposed to dry air. In the root cellar's humid embrace, that same apple could retain its plumpness, its sweetness, long into the dark days of winter. So, what treasures would fill these earthy vaults? A truly astonishing array of produce, carefully selected and tenderly placed. Imagine bushel baskets brimming with crisp, firm apples, their faint, sweet perfume mingling with the earthy scent of the cellar. Pears, too, would rest there, some varieties ripening slowly, offering a taste of late autumn well into the new year. Root vegetables, of course, were the stars of this underground larder. Carrots, washed of their clinging soil but not scrubbed too vigorously, would be carefully layered in sand or sawdust, each golden orange stick a promise of future flavor. Potatoes, their skin firm and unbroken, would be nestled gently into bins, away from direct light, ensuring they wouldn't sprout prematurely. Beets, their deep crimson glow, and turnips, with their peppery bite, would also find their place, patiently awaiting their turn to grace a winter stew. Beyond these staples, one might also find cabbages, their enormous heads carefully wrapped or simply piled, their inner leaves remaining crisp for weeks. Pumpkins and squashes, harvested after the first light frost, their tough skins acting as natural protection, would be arranged on shelves or directly on the floor, their cheerful orange and green forms a silent reminder of summer's warmth. Sometimes, even jars of pickled vegetables or preserved fruits, sealed and stored, would find their home here, benefiting from the consistent cool temperature that aided their longevity. The root cellar was not merely a storage space, it was a testament to foresight, to painstaking labor, and to the deep understanding of natural processes. It was a place where families invested their hopes for sustenance through the long, barren months. The careful placement of each item, the quiet monitoring of conditions, the occasional turning of a particularly delicate fruit, all these were acts of patient devotion. Every single carrot pulled from its sandy bed, every apple retrieved from a basket, was a direct link to the sun-drenched days of summer, a tangible piece of the earth's generosity carefully managed and preserved. Without the root cellar, the prospect of surviving winter, especially for families living far from markets or regular supply chains, would have been immeasurably more daunting. It was a vital buffer against hunger, a literal lifeline of nutrition during times when fresh produce was simply unobtainable from the frozen, sleeping earth. It speaks to an ingenuity that harnessed the very essence of nature's provision, turning the cool, dark quiet of the underground into a vibrant, living pantry. The root cellar was a silent, steadfast guardian, ensuring that the warmth of summer's bounty could nourish families through even the coldest, longest winter nights. Tonight, we drift back to a time when the world moved at a different pace, a time when the rhythm of life was dictated by the seasons, and every effort was a thoughtful step towards the security of the coming winter. Close your eyes if you like, or simply allow your gaze to soften, letting the gentle murmur of my voice guide you into the soft glow of a forgotten hearth. As you settle into your most comfortable place, perhaps dimming the light if it pleases you, let us embark on a journey through the quiet ingenuity of those who came before us. If, by the end of our time together, you find a measure of peace and a whisper of wonder, consider offering a gentle like or perhaps subscribing to our channel, but only if it feels right, a soft affirmation of the quiet moments we share. We have spoken of the quiet hum of preparedness, the diligent gathering, and the careful storage of garden's bounty. Now, our attention turns to another cornerstone of winter survival, an essential element for sustenance when the earth lay dormant and game became a fleeting sight. We are delving into the world of meat preservation, a realm where ingenuity met necessity, transforming perishable flesh into a lasting promise of warmth and strength through the harshest months. Imagine, if you will, a crisp autumn day, perhaps the air carrying the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. The successful hunt has yielded its bounty, a deer perhaps, or a wild boar, its warmth still lingering. In our modern age, a swift trip to the refrigerator or freezer would secure this precious protein. But in the times we explore, such luxuries were unimaginable. The clock was always ticking, the inexorable march of decay a constant threat. Thus, the ancient arts of salt curing and smoking were not merely culinary techniques, they were vital acts of survival, threads woven into the very fabric of family existence. They ensured a steady, reliable supply of protein, a fundamental building block of life, especially when the landscape was locked in winter's icy embrace and fresh game was either dormant, migrated, or simply too difficult to track and fell. Let's first consider the profound power of salt, that unassuming crystalline gift from the earth and sea. Before refrigeration, salt was arguably the most crucial preservative known to humankind. Its scientific magic lies in its ability to draw out moisture from food through osmosis. Bacteria and other spoilage microorganisms require water to thrive. By effectively dehydrating the meat, salt created an environment hostile to these microscopic invaders, thus halting the process of decay. The process of salt curing was often a meticulous and labor-intensive affair, a testament to the value placed upon each precious piece of meat. Envision large, shallow wooden tubs or crocks, perhaps lined with coarse linen or canvas. Into these, the carefully butchered cuts of meat would be laid, often in layers, each piece generously, almost reverently, coated with a thick, shimmering blanket of salt. Not just any salt would do, coarse, unrefined salt, rich in minerals, was highly prized for its efficacy. Sometimes, alongside the salt, other ingredients would be introduced, not only for flavor but also for their own subtle preservative qualities, a scattering of peppercorns, fragrant bay leaves, or perhaps a hint of juniper berries, each adding its silent contribution to the long sleep of the meat. The amount of salt used was substantial, reflecting the urgent need for robust preservation. The meat would literally be packed in salt, sometimes forming a solid block around it. This dry cure method was common and incredibly effective. Over days, and sometimes weeks, depending on the thickness and type of meat, the salt would slowly, patiently, begin its work. You could almost feel the moisture being drawn out, a subtle transformation taking place. The meat would firm up, its color deepening, its texture becoming denser. This brining process, whether dry or in a liquid solution, was a slow ballet of chemistry, transforming the very essence of the meat, making it less hospitable to spoilage and imbuing it with its distinctive cured flavor. Once the curing process was complete, the salt-packed meat would often be hung in a cool, dry place, a cellar, a pantry, or a smokehouse corner where the air was consistently cool and circulated gently. This secondary drying phase further reduced moisture content, solidifying the preservation. Imagine rows of hams, sides of bacon, or hunks of beef, hanging like silent sentinels, testament to the family's foresight and diligence, their very presence a promise of sustenance throughout the lean months ahead. These were not merely cuts of meat, they were packages of endurance, each bite a step further through the challenges of winter. Now, let us turn our attention to the enchanting art of smoking, a technique that not only preserved but also imparted a rich, complex tapestry of flavors. Smoking, like salt curing, was a dance with time and natural elements. It harnessed the antiseptic and antioxidant properties of wood smoke, enveloping the meat in a protective shroud of aromatic compounds. The smoke itself contains phenols, acids, and other chemicals that inhibit bacterial growth and prevent the oxidation of fats, which can lead to rancidity. Envision a small, unassuming structure, perhaps tucked away behind the main dwelling, the smokehouse. This was a place of quiet industry, often made of stone or wood, with careful ventilation to allow smoke to circulate but not escape too quickly. Inside, the cured meats, having completed their salt-induced transformation, would be suspended from hooks or racks. Below, a low, smoldering fire would be carefully tended, typically using hardwoods like oak, hickory, apple, or cherry. Each would lend its unique signature to the meat, hickory for a strong, piquant flavor, apple for a gentle sweetness, oak for a robust earthiness. The key to effective smoking was a low, slow burn. There was no rush here, no desire for flame. Instead, it was about coaxing forth a steady stream of cool, dense smoke. Hot smoking, while quicker, cooked the meat and thus reduced its shelf life. Cold smoking, on the other hand, was the true preservative art. The temperature inside the smokehouse would be kept deliberately low, often below 80 degrees Fahrenheit, ensuring that the meat was infused with smoke without being cooked. This gentle, prolonged exposure over days, sometimes even weeks, was what created the deep, indelible preservation. Imagine the scent, a profound and ancient aroma. The slow curl of smoke, thick and fragrant, weaving its way around each hanging piece of meat, gradually coating its surface with a thin, protective pellicle. This smoky film, along with the continued dehydration, formed an impenetrable barrier against spoilage. The surface of the meat would darken, taking on a rich, burnished hue, a visual testament to the hundreds of hours spent in its aromatic embrace. Beyond mere preservation, smoking also transformed the texture and flavor of the meat in remarkable ways. It tenderized, it deepened, it added layers of complexity that were both hearty and subtly nuanced. A piece of smoked ham, after weeks in the smokehouse, was a far cry from its fresh counterpart. It was a food imbued with character, a narrative in every bite. When the snow lay thick outside and the larder seemed sparse, a slice of smoked bacon or a chunk of cured beef would not just fill an empty stomach, it would provide profound reassurance, a connection to the sustained labor of harvest and preservation from months before. These preserved meats were not typically consumed fresh off the hook. Often, they required further preparation before eating. Salted fish, for instance, might need to be soaked for hours, even overnight, in several changes of fresh water to leach out the excess salt, making it palatable. Smoked meats could be eaten as is, perhaps sliced thinly for a sandwich of sorts, or more likely, they would be rehydrated and cooked into stews, soups, or served alongside dried vegetables, becoming the savory anchor of a winter meal. Each dish, a testament to the ingenuity of earlier times, a dance between scarcity and sustenance. The importance of these techniques cannot be overstated. Without them, large game animals, once caught, would spoil rapidly, their protein value quickly lost. Salt curing and smoking allowed families to harness that abundant, but fleeting, resource, stretching its lifeblood across the long, stark expanse of winter. They were not just preserving food, they were preserving life, ensuring strength for daily chores, for children's growth, and for the simple endurance required to face another cold morning. So, as you relax deeper into your thoughts, imagine the quiet satisfaction of seeing a well-stocked pantry or smokehouse, perhaps the earthy aroma of cured meat mingling with the faint sweetness of dried apples. It was a sensory symphony of survival, a comforting promise in a world without the instantaneous convenience we now know. These practices were a profound act of self-reliance, a respectful stewardship of nature's bounty, and a deeply ingrained wisdom passed down through generations. They allowed families to face the silent, snow-covered landscape with a measure of peace, knowing that the heart of their home, their sustenance, was secure. Tonight, we drift back to a quieter time, a time long before the hum of constant illumination, a time when darkness held a deeper dominion over the long winter nights. As you settle into your comfiest chair, perhaps with a warm blanket draped over your shoulders and your lights dimmed to a soothing glow, allow your mind to journey with us. Should you find a measure of peace in these words tonight, a gentle sigh of calm, then perhaps consider leaving a like, and subscribing, should you wish to join us on future journeys into the comforting past. We have explored the warmth of the hearth and the practicalities of food preservation, but now, let us turn our attention to the delicate, flickering heart of the winter evening, light itself. Before the ubiquitous brilliance of electricity transformed our nights into lengthened days, the world after sunset was a realm of profound shadows, punctuated by intimate pools of fragile illumination. Imagine, if you will, the slow descent of the winter sun, its pale light gradually fading from the windows, replaced by the encroaching embrace of twilight. In the absence of electric switches and instant brightness, the gathering gloom inside a home was a signal, a gentle but firm command, altering the very rhythm of daily life. The activities that filled the sunlit hours, the chopping of wood, the tending of livestock, the mending of tools, gave way to tasks suited for a softer, more confined radius of light. At the very heart of this dim luminosity, often, was the humble tallow candle. Not the sleek, refined candles we might know today, but rather the more rustic, often handmade versions fashioned from animal fat, typically beef or mutton tallow. The process of making these candles was itself a winter chore, a way to utilize every part of a slaughtered animal. Imagine the rendering of the fat, the slow, bubbling transformation into a liquid that would then be poured around a cotton or hemp wick, patiently dipped and redipped, layer by layer, until a serviceable candle took shape. Their scent, a faint, slightly musky aroma, would have been part of the olfactory tapestry of a winter home. These tallow candles, affordable and relatively easy to produce at home, provided a remarkably gentle, slightly yellowish flame. It was a soft, warm glow, but one that consumed itself, steadily diminishing in height as the hours passed. A single tallow candle offered only a modest amount of light, sufficient for a small area, perhaps a single reader hunched over a book, or a seamstress's careful stitches. To adequately illuminate a larger room for family activities, several such candles would be needed, each diligently placed, their flames dancing in unison, casting elongated, wavering shadows across the walls and ceiling. Beyond the tallow candle, offering a more consistent, if still limited, brightness, were the oil lamps. These too, evolved over centuries, from simple saucers of oil with floating wicks to more sophisticated designs. Whale oil, once a prevalent fuel, particularly in coastal communities, eventually gave way to kerosene, especially after its widespread availability in the mid-19th century. Kerosene lamps, with their glass chimneys to protect the flame and enhance its draw, provided a brighter, steadier light than tallow candles. The meticulous cleaning of these lamp chimneys, to ensure an unblemished, clear light, would have been a daily ritual, a quiet act of maintenance, preventing the accumulation of soot that would dim and distort the flame. The light from an oil lamp had a unique quality: it was a focused, powerful glow that allowed for more intricate tasks. One could knit with greater ease, read with less strain, or perhaps mend fishing nets with a clearer view of the fine threads. The gentle hiss of a well-trimmed wick, and the subtle scent of burning oil, would have been familiar accompaniments to the winter evenings. These lamps, often kept on tables or hanging from hooks, created distinct circles of light in the vast darkness of a room, drawing family members together around their comforting luminescence. And then, of course, there was the fire itself. The hearth, the beating heart of the home, was not merely a source of warmth but also a giver of light. The leaping, roaring flames of a well-stoked fire would cast a dramatic, ruddy glow across the main living space. This light was dynamic, constantly shifting, brightening with a fresh log, dimming as the embers settled. It was an untamed, living light, full of movement and warmth, painting faces in hues of orange and gold. The stories told by firelight, the quiet contemplation of its ceaseless dance, were deeply embedded in the rhythm of winter evenings. In these conditions, the very concept of night life was profoundly different. The expansive, illuminated hours we take for granted simply did not exist. The early fall of night meant a natural curtailment of activities. Without the means to brightly light and warm every corner of a dwelling, people instinctively gathered in the most illuminated and heated areas, typically around the hearth. This limited illumination inherently shaped social patterns and personal habits. Bedtimes were earlier, dictated by the diminishing light and the cost of burning precious candles or oil. Reading, for those who indulged, was often done close to a window in the fading afternoon light, or by the focused beam of a single lamp. Conversation, storytelling, mending, and quiet contemplation became the primary evening pursuits, encouraged by the natural intimacy of shared, dim light. Consider the atmosphere, the subtle shadows lengthening and shrinking with every flicker, the warm glow on faces, the soft crackle of the fire, perhaps the gentle scent of beeswax or the faint aroma of oil. It was a multisensory experience that encouraged a slower pace, a turning inward. The world outside, veiled in profound darkness and often muffled by snow, felt distant and quiet. The very slowness of acquiring light, from making a candle to filling and lighting an oil lamp, instilled a respect for this precious resource. Light was not an endless, effortless commodity, it was earned, maintained, and valued. This perspective fostered an appreciation for the finite nature of each evening's illumination. Even the simple act of moving through a home after dark required a different kind of awareness. Carrying a candle or a small lamp from room to room, the brief moments of stepping back into complete darkness before re-entering a circle of light, were commonplace experiences. One learned the layout of the home by feel, guided by memory and the occasional fleeting gleam. As we gently draw this journey through the softly lit winter nights to a close, allow your mind to absorb the feeling of this profound quietude, this slower pace dictated by the rhythms of the earth and the delicate dance of flame. These dim glows, far from being a hardship, cultivated a unique kind of intimacy and human connection, fostering conversations and quiet reflections that the brightest lights cannot always inspire. The winter night, in the era before electricity, was not simply an absence of light, but a presence of gentle, flickering brilliance that shaped domestic life in ways we can only begin to imagine, bringing families together in small, radiant circles against the vast canvas of the enveloping dark. Tonight, we continue our gentle journey into winters past, the kind of deep, hushed winters, long before the soft glow of electric lights or the comforting hum of modern heating. We are easing ourselves back into a time when the season dictated the very rhythm of life, a compelling beat measured by the demands of survival and the quiet satisfaction of daily tasks well done. To begin, perhaps you might find a particularly comfortable spot, allow your shoulders to soften a little, and consider dimming the light by just a touch, if that feels right for you. Last time, we explored the fascinating art of winter preparations, the meticulous gathering and preserving that was the bedrock of enduring the cold months. Now, we turn our attention to the rhythm of winter itself, the daily pulse of activity that continued, unfaltering, even as the world outside was cloaked in snow and frost. The very essence of daily life, those fundamental chores that kept a household functioning, underwent a profound transformation with the arrival of winter. It was not merely that tasks continued, they were imbued with a new layer of difficulty, a persistent challenge that demanded increased effort and ingenuity. The crisp morning air, far from being invigorating, often carried a biting chill that immediately prompted thoughtful consideration about each action. Stepping outside meant donning layers of wool and perhaps thick leather, wrapping oneself against an invisible adversary. Fetching water, a seemingly simple act in warmer months often involving a trip to a nearby well or spring, became a demanding ordeal. As temperatures dropped, surface water bodies like lakes and rivers would freeze, and even wells could develop a thick cap of ice. The task of obtaining water might involve breaking through several inches, sometimes even a foot or more, of solid ice. This wasn't a quick hack with a small tool, it often required a sharp axe or a specialized ice chisel, wielded with significant force and precision. Imagine the steady, rhythmic thwack of the axe head against the frozen surface, the splintering cracks, the deep satisfaction as a segment finally broke free, allowing access to the liquid treasure beneath. The water, once painstakingly retrieved, was then carefully carried back to the warmth of the home, perhaps in heavy wooden buckets or earthenware pitchers, each step mindful so as not to spill a precious drop, not to slip on unseen patches of ice. These journeys, especially for families without handy indoor wells, were often made multiple times a day, sometimes through drifting snow, the cold air stinging exposed skin. Each bucket represented warmth, sustenance, and cleanliness, a tangible link to life itself. Beyond human needs, the care of livestock presented another significant winter challenge. These animals, whether they were the sturdy oxen used for plowing, the dairy cows providing milk, the sheep offering wool and meat, or the indispensable chickens scratching for their feed, were integral to the family's survival. Their well-being was directly linked to the family's prosperity, or even its very existence. Providing food for these animals in winter was a carefully planned endeavor. Hay, gathered and dried during the summer, often with laborious toil under the hot sun, became their primary sustenance. It was stored in barns, often in lofts above the animals themselves, where its bulk provided a measure of insulation for the creatures below. Daily, arms full of the sweet-smelling, golden stalks would be carried down and distributed into mangers. The farmer would observe each animal, checking for signs of good health, noting any shift in their demeanor. The act of feeding was not rushed, it was a quiet communion, a vital exchange. Water for livestock also became a considerable concern. Just like human water sources, outdoor troughs would freeze solid. This often necessitated breaking ice in larger quantities, or perhaps the tedious but essential process of melting snow over a fire. Sometimes, water would be painstakingly carried out from the house, or thawed by repeatedly pouring heated water into the frozen trough until the ice yielded. The large animals would then drink deeply, steam rising gently from their nostrils in the frosty air. This daily ritual, repeated often, ensured their hydration, vital for good health and productivity. The constant vigilance against freezing allowed an appreciation for the simple miracle of liquid water. Protection from the elements was equally paramount. Barns, while rudimentary by modern standards, were designed to offer shelter. Their thick wooden walls, often chinked with mud or moss, provided a barrier against the harshest winds. The collective body heat of the animals within also contributed to a slightly milder microclimate. Farmers would regularly check on their animals, ensuring they were well bedded, often with fresh straw that provided warmth and absorbed moisture. Any drafts or failing sections of the barn were mended promptly. A cold animal was an unhealthy animal, and an unhealthy animal was a significant risk. The gentle lowing of a cow, the soft bleating of a sheep, or the contented clucking of hens were all reassuring sounds, indicators of their well-being. Firewood, as we touched upon in our last session, continued to be a daily demand. The large stockpiles gathered in autumn, stacked neatly and often covered against snow, were regularly drawn upon. This wasn't merely a matter of grabbing a few logs. The wood often needed to be brought into the house, split further to a suitable size for the hearth, and stacked near the fire to thoroughly dry, ensuring a clean, efficient burn. The sharp, clean smell of freshly split wood mingled with the softer fragrance of burning embers within the home, a constant, comforting presence. The axe, carefully sharpened, became a familiar tool in the winter landscape, its rhythmic chop echoing occasionally through the quiet, cold air. Each split log represented warmth, cooking, and light, a continuous investment in the family's comfort. For the women of the household, domestic tasks also intensified. Laundry, for instance, became a far more challenging undertaking. Washing clothes in freezing temperatures, often without readily available hot water, was physically demanding. Water had to be heated over the fire, and then the washing was done by hand, perhaps with lye soap, in large wooden tubs. The most formidable challenge, however, was drying. Hanging wet laundry outside in sub-zero temperatures meant the clothes would freeze solid, stiff and board-like. They then needed to be brought inside, often arranged around the hearth or hung from drying racks, to slowly thaw and dry, their moisture adding a unique humidity to the air within the dwelling. This was a patient, lengthy process, demanding careful management of indoor space and warmth. The scent of wood smoke often clung to the dried garments, a subtle, earthy fragrance. Food preparation, while less about preservation by this point, shifted focus to heartier, warming meals. Winter diets leaned heavily on preserved meats, root vegetables from the cellar, and grains. Slow-cooked stews and porridges were common, simmering gently over the fire for hours, filling the home with rich, comforting aromas. Each meal was a caloric investment, fueling bodies against the cold. Baking, too, offered a welcome burst of warmth from the oven or hearth, the smell of fresh bread a particular delight in the stark landscape. Beyond the practicalities, the very act of living through winter imposed a different mental and physical rhythm. Short daylight hours meant that activities were compressed. Much of the early morning and late evening were spent by the dim light of tallow candles or the dancing flames of the hearth. This reduced visibility often led to quieter, more reflective periods. Storytelling, mending, and quiet craftsmanship, activities that could be done by flickering light, naturally filled these longer evenings. The sense of being enclosed, yet protected, within the home deepened. Each task, whether it was shattering ice for water, scattering feed for hungry animals, or carefully tending the fire, was a small test of endurance, a quiet act of resilience. There was a profound daily satisfaction in knowing that these vital needs were met, that the family and its creatures were cared for, and that another day was navigated successfully against the backdrop of winter's indifferent beauty. This rhythm, though arduous, forged a deep connection to the land and to the cycles of the natural world, a connection we might rarely experience in our electrically governed lives today. We will continue our gentle exploration soon, drifting into the quiet artistry of light and warmth in these winter homes of old. Until then, perhaps allow these quiet images to settle gently within your thoughts, and may your own evening be especially peaceful. Tonight, we drift back to a quieter time, a time long before the flickering screens and the hum of modern life, to ponder how families once navigated the long, stark months of winter without the comforting glow of electricity. As you settle in, perhaps dimming the lights and finding a truly comfortable space, allow your mind to gently wander with me, and if you find solace in these quiet reflections, remember you can always return to our gentle narratives by subscribing and perhaps leaving a quiet appreciation. Now, as the crisp air outside began to truly bite, and the days shortened with an almost palpable speed, the rhythmic thump of a foot on a treadle, or the soft whir of a spinning wheel, would become a familiar lullaby within many homes. This was deeply embedded in the very fabric of daily life, quite literally, the creation of textiles. Such a vital endeavor, the production of warm clothing and blankets, was not merely a chore, it was an ongoing domestic industry, a continuous, essential cycle vital to survival. The fibers that would become a comforting blanket or a sturdy pair of mittens often began their journey months before, perhaps on the back of a shaggy sheep grazing in a distant pasture throughout the warmer months. As autumn deepened, the shorn wool, cleaned and carded into soft, fluffy rolls, would be brought indoors, ready to be transformed. The spinning wheel, a marvel of simple engineering, would be brought out and positioned near the hearth, where the soft, dancing light of the fire could illuminate the delicate work. Imagine the spinner, often a woman or an older child, settling into a rhythm. Her fingers, deft and accustomed, would deftly draw out a wisp of wool, attaching it to the rapidly rotating spindle. The wheel would turn with a gentle, insistent hum, its motion translating into the gentle twist that transformed loose fibers into a continuous, delicate thread. There was a hypnotic quality to the work, a steady, measured pace that allowed the mind to wander, to contemplate the quiet beauty of the falling snow outside the window, or to simply rest in the peaceful repetition. The yarn that emerged, whether a fine, almost translucent strand for delicate garments or a robust, thick thread for rugged blankets, represented countless hours of patient effort. Each skein wound and set aside was not just a collection of fibers, it was a tangible store of warmth, a promise of comfort against the encroaching chill. Once enough yarn had been accumulated, the next stage of this vital domestic industry would begin, weaving. For many families, this meant setting up the loom, a more substantial piece of equipment that often dominated a corner of the main living space in winter. The loom, with its intricate arrangement of warp and weft threads, was a testament to human ingenuity. Preparing the loom was a task in itself, requiring meticulous attention to detail, carefully threading each warp strand through the heddles and reeds. This was often a communal effort, with family members assisting in the painstaking process of setting up the foundational threads, which would then patiently await the journey of the shuttle. Hear the gentle clack-clack of the shuttle as it passed back and forth, carrying the weft thread across the taut warp. The wooden frame of the loom would sigh softly with each movement of the treadles, as the weaver's feet pressed down, separating the warped threads and allowing the shuttle to pass through the newly created shed. Then, with a satisfying thump, the reed would be pulled forward, pushing the newly laid weft thread firmly into place against its predecessors. Each pass of the shuttle, each thump of the reed, incrementally built the fabric, inch by quiet inch. Whether it was sturdy homespun cloth for tunics and trousers, or a thick, felted wool for an extra layer on the bed, the weaving process was a slow, deliberate act of creation. It demanded focus and patience, yet it also offered a deep sense of satisfaction. The texture of the newly woven cloth, perhaps still imbued with the scent of lanolin, would be carefully examined. It was more than just cloth, it was protection. These diligently spun yarns and painstakingly woven fabrics provided not only crucial insulation against the pervasive cold, but also a profound sense of productivity and accomplishment for the family. The very act of creating these textiles, thread by thread, and row by row, wove a palpable warmth not only into the clothing worn and the blankets used, but also into the very heart of the household during those long, dark winter evenings. It was a rhythmic dance of human hands and humble materials, transforming raw fibers into the very essence of winter comfort. Tonight, we drift back to a time when the world moved a little slower, when the rhythms of nature dictated the pace of life, and when winter brought with it a profound stillness that reached into every home. Settle in, perhaps dim the lights a little, and allow yourself to truly relax. If tonight's journey brings you a sense of calm and quiet, then perhaps you might consider subscribing or giving this video a gentle like. For now, simply get comfortable. As the days began to shorten and the air grew crisp with the promise of snow, an unspoken understanding settled over every homestead. Winter was not merely a change in season, but a transformation of the landscape, and with it, a profound shift in the daily routines of families. The preparations we've discussed, the canning, the curing, the meticulous stacking of firewood, were all in anticipation of a period when the very notion of leaving one's home would become a significant undertaking, often fraught with difficulty. We have explored the warmth of the hearth and the comforting glow of oil lamps, the ingenuity of food preservation, and the warmth of layered textiles. But as the snow began to fall, sometimes gently at first, a soft blanket descending upon the fields, and then with a more determined insistence, piling up against fences and creating drifts that dwarfed doorways, another aspect of winter life, often less discussed but profoundly experienced, began to manifest: the quiet, sometimes complete, isolation. Heavy snowfall, an event that today might simply warrant a day off from school or a moment of frustration for commuters, held a far more substantial weight in homes before the advent of electricity and the widespread infrastructure of our modern world. These were not mere dustings, but often relentless deluges that could bury entire landscapes. One could imagine waking after a particularly long night of snowfall to find the windows completely obscured, the world outside transformed into an undulating expanse of white, utterly trackless and daunting. Roads, if one could even call them roads in the contemporary sense, were often little more than well-trodden paths that wound through fields or followed the contours of the land. They were not paved or regularly cleared, and a significant snowfall rendered them utterly impassable. For families, this meant a sudden and often prolonged severance from the nearest town, from neighbors, from any external contact beyond what could be seen from the windows or heard carried on the muffled wind. This isolation was not always immediate. Perhaps a few days of heavy snow might make travel inconvenient, but a blizzard, a genuine, sustained blizzard, could mean the vanishing of these pathways for weeks, sometimes even months, until the spring thaws began to reveal the earth once more. Imagine the quiet apprehension that would settle in, the careful inventory of supplies that would be taken, not just for a few days, but for an unknown duration. Travel, when absolutely necessary, became an arduous and often dangerous endeavor. The familiar horse and cart, so useful in other seasons, was rendered largely useless in deep snow. Instead, reliance fell upon specialized forms of transport, each requiring significant effort and skill. Sledges, often heavy wooden structures pulled by horses or, in some cases, by strong oxen, were the primary means of moving goods or people across the snow-covered terrain. These sledges would slide rather than roll, their broad runners distributing weight and allowing passage over deep drifts that would swallow wheels whole. The journey would be slow, the biting wind a constant companion, and the world a stark, silent panorama of white. For individual travel, or for venturing out for smaller tasks like checking animal traps or collecting wood from closer groves, snowshoes became indispensable. These ingenious devices, often crafted from wood and sinew, extended the surface area of one's feet, allowing a person to walk over the snow rather than sinking deep into it with every step. The rhythm of snowshoeing was a unique one, a slow, deliberate shuffle, each foot lifted and placed with care, the breath curling in frosty plumes before one's face. It was a solitary sound, the soft crunch of snow underfoot, perhaps the distant call of an owl or the whisper of wind through skeletal branches. The danger in such travel was manifold. Beyond the sheer physical exertion, there was the constant threat of getting lost in a whiteout, where all sense of direction could be obliterated by swirling snow and a featureless landscape. Frostbite was a very real concern, demanding meticulous attention to layering and covering exposed skin. And, of course, there was the unpredictable nature of the snow itself, hidden hollows that could collapse underfoot, sudden drifts that could trap a traveler, or the simple misfortune of a sudden fall in sub-zero temperatures. Children, too, experienced this unique isolation. Their world would often shrink to the confines of the home and its immediate surroundings. Play would be indoors, or very close to the house, supervised by watchful parents. The absence of school or social gatherings with other families meant that siblings became each other's primary companions, deepening their bonds through shared experiences of warmth and quiet within the family unit. This isolation, while challenging, also fostered a unique sense of self-reliance and community within the household. It demanded ingenuity, patience, and a deep appreciation for the resources at hand. It was a time for introspection, for storytelling around the fire, for mending and crafting, for the quiet unfolding of domestic life. The outside world faded, and the home became its own small universe, carefully provisioned and warmly protected against the formidable embrace of the winter landscape. And through it all, the falling snow continued its silent performance, a reminder of the powerful, uncompromising beauty of nature, and the quiet strength required to live in harmony with its ancient rhythms. Tonight, we drift back to a time when the world moved at a slower, more deliberate pace, a time before the hum of electricity filled our homes and the instant glow of a light bulb banished the darkness. We will explore how families, in their quiet perseverance, navigated the formidable embrace of winter, how they found warmth, sustenance, and continuation during those long, hushed months. As you settle in, perhaps nestling deeper into your pillows, or finding that perfect, still comfort, allow the gentle current of these words to carry you. If, by the end of our journey, you find a peaceful moment within their flow, please consider a soft like or a quiet subscription to join us again for future stories. We now turn our attention to the intricate, often unspoken, bonds that wove communities together, even in the seeming solitude of a winter landscape. It is easy, from our modern vantage point, to imagine a past fraught with isolation, where each homestead stood as an independent fortress against the cold. Yet, the reality, for so many, was a testament to the profound resilience and inherent generosity of the human spirit. Despite the vast, often snow-laden distances that separated dwellings, despite the deep drifts that could obscure familiar pathways, communities often found ways to coalesce, to rally, to draw closer in spirit and in deed. This was not merely a matter of convenience, it was often a fundamental cornerstone of survival itself. The sharing of resources, for instance, became an almost instinctive response to scarcity. A family that had enjoyed a particularly bountiful harvest of potatoes, or whose root cellar still held a healthy supply of pickled vegetables, might offer a portion to a neighbor whose stores were dwindling. This was rarely, if ever, a transaction burdened by expectation or immediate recompense. It was instead a quiet understanding, a recognition that the tides of fortune could shift, and that today's giver might well be tomorrow's receiver. Grain, carefully threshed and stored, might be lent to ensure a struggling family could plant their spring fields. A prized milk cow, perhaps temporarily producing more than its owners could consume, might have its rich bounty shared with others, the precious liquid carried across the snowy fields in covered pails. These were not grand gestures, shouted from the rooftops, but rather the subtle, continuous weaving of a net of support, each thread strengthening the whole cloth of the community. Beyond the sharing of tangible provisions, there was the invaluable sharing of labor, a resource as precious as any foodstuff, particularly when faced with monumental tasks. The iconic image of a barn raising perfectly encapsulates this spirit. When a new barn was needed, or an existing one had fallen into disrepair, perhaps damaged by a particularly fierce winter storm, the undertaking was simply too vast for a single family to manage alone. The sheer scale of felling trees, hewing timbers, and then raising those enormous wooden frames into place demanded many hands, many backs, and many hours of concerted effort. News would travel through the snow-muffled landscape, perhaps carried by a stout rider on horseback, or simply passed along from one homestead to the next during infrequent visits. And when the appointed day arrived, often in a brief respite from the deepest cold, or in the promise of late winter's approaching thaw, neighbors would gather. They would arrive with their tools, their expertise, and their unwavering willingness to contribute. The air would fill with the rhythmic thud of mallets against wood, the precise ring of axes, and the low, collective murmuring of men and women working in unison. Children, bundled warmly, might dart through the periphery, occasionally offering passed water or simply observing the impressive spectacle of communal purpose. Women would gather in a nearby home, or perhaps under a temporary shelter, to prepare a prodigious feast for the workers, the warm, comforting aroma of stews and freshly baked bread wafting through the crisp air, a testament to their equally vital contribution. This was more than just construction, it was a deeply social event, a powerful reaffirmation of belonging. As the heavy timbers were slowly, painstakingly lifted into place, guided by strong hands and clear calls, there was a palpable sense of shared achievement, of mutual trust. The barn, once completed, stood not just as a shelter for livestock and hay, but as a monument to collective effort, a tangible symbol of the community's ability to triumph over challenge. Emergency aid, too, often fell under this umbrella of communal support. A sudden illness, a devastating fire that consumed a home, or an unexpected accident could, in those unforgiving winters, spell catastrophe for a family. In a world without readily available medical professionals, without instant communication, and without public assistance, the immediate response of neighbors was often the only bulwark against utter despair. Someone might ride for miles through a blizzard to fetch a midwife or a skilled elder with knowledge of herbal remedies. Others would arrive to offer temporary shelter, to help rebuild a damaged dwelling, or simply to provide comfort and practical assistance during a time of profound distress. The quiet strength derived from knowing that one was not truly alone, even in the isolation of a snowbound homestead, was an immeasurable comfort. These acts of mutual dependence were not codified in laws or formal agreements, they were etched into the very fabric of daily life, a deeply ingrained understanding passed down through generations. They arose from a pragmatic recognition of shared vulnerability in the face of nature's formidable power. The long, silent stretch of winter, with its inherent challenges and scarcities, only served to amplify this awareness. The hearth fires that glowed in isolated windows across the snowy landscape were not merely sources of personal warmth, they were also quiet beacons, signaling the enduring presence of human life, connected by threads of reciprocity and care. The success of one family, in many ways, was intertwined with the success of others. It was a time when the boundaries between my land and your land blurred in the face of common need, when the rhythm of life was often set by the collective heartbeat of a community quietly, patiently, enduring the long winter together. Tonight, we drift back to a quieter time, a time when the world moved at a slower, more deliberate pace. As you settle into your comfiest spot, perhaps with a warm blanket drawn around you and the lights dimmed low, allow your mind to unfurl, to gently unfocus from the day's concerns. We are going to journey back, far beyond the illuminated screens and constant hum of our modern lives, to a winter landscape that knew no electric glow, no instant entertainment. If you find peace and comfort in these words, a soft whisper of history's gentle embrace, then perhaps you might consider offering a quiet like or subscribing for more such journeys. In those long, unhurried evenings, as the fire settled into a steady warmth and the world outside transformed into a realm of hushed beauty, families found profound solace and deep connection in the most ancient of human traditions, the sharing of stories. With the twilight deepening and the windows frosted into intricate lace patterns, a sense of quiet anticipation would often settle over the household. The chores were finished, the evening meal had nurtured bodies, and now, the mind and spirit hungered for engagement. There were no glowing screens to distract, no flickers of light from distant channels. Instead, the flickering tongues of the hearth fire played dancing shadows on the walls, creating an ever-shifting backdrop for tales both familiar and new. The storyteller, often a grandparent or a parent, would settle into their favorite chair, perhaps with a soft sigh that bespoke a treasure trove of memories and imaginings. Their voice, warm and resonant, would begin to spin threads of narrative, drawing everyone present into a world conjured purely by words and shared attention. These were not always grand epics of heroes and dragons, though such tales certainly had their place, especially for younger, eager ears. Often, the stories were woven from the rich tapestry of family history, tales of ancestors bravely facing hardships, of humorous escapades during childhood summers, or perhaps of a quiet triumph over a forgotten challenge. Imagine the children, their faces soft in the firelight, listening intently as a grandmother described her own youth in vivid detail, painting pictures of snowfalls so deep they buried fences, or of the wonder of a traveling peddler arriving with exotic wares. Such personal anecdotes were not merely entertainment, they were vital threads connecting generations, imbuing children with a sense of their heritage, their place within a continuum of lives lived. Beyond family chronicles, there were also the well-worn folk tales, passed down through countless winters. These might be cautionary legends of mischievous sprites in the woods, or heartwarming fables teaching kindness and perseverance. The cadence of these stories, repeated over years, became a comforting rhythm, oral blankets against the chill. The stories themselves were often imbued with the very spirit of winter, tales of cunning foxes in the snow, of animals seeking shelter, or of the quiet magic that seemed to cling to the frozen landscape. And then there was music, a balm for the soul, a gentle current flowing through the long evenings. Without the ubiquitous radio or recorded anthems, music was a deeply personal, participatory art. Simple instruments were cherished possessions, a well-loved fiddle, its varnish gleaming softly in the firelight, a sturdy banjo, its strings seasoned by countless strummed chords, or even just a simple tin whistle, capable of producing remarkably clear, sweet notes. Someone in the family, or perhaps a visiting neighbor, would possess the skill to play, and their fingers, nimble and practiced, would begin to coax melodies from the wood and metal. The music could be lively, spurring impromptu foot-tapping and soft humming, perhaps a jig or a reel that momentarily chased away the feeling of confinement. Or it might be a more melancholic tune, reflecting the quiet introspection that winter often brings, a gentle lament that resonated with the season's beautiful starkness. Often, singing would accompany the instruments. Not professional, polished voices, but the genuine, unforced sound of a family singing together, their voices blending in harmony, perhaps slightly off-key but filled with sincere emotion. Traditional ballads, hymns, and folk songs were the repertoire, each verse a small story in itself, each chorus a shared experience. The sound of these voices, weaving together in the warm glow, created an atmosphere of profound communal peace, a sense of belonging that transcended the physical confines of the room. Beyond the rich tapestry of stories and songs, quiet indoor amusements provided another layer of connection and gentle stimulation. There were no flashing screens or complex digital games, but rather the focused concentration of simple, tactile engagements. Card games were immensely popular, from the strategic thinking of whist to the playful banter of charades. A deck of cards, often well thumbed and perhaps a little worn at the edges, could provide hours of entertainment, sparking cheerful competition and light-hearted arguments. Board games, often handmade or passed down through generations, were another source of quiet joy. Perhaps a game of checkers, with its alternating patterns of reds and blacks, or a more intricate game of backgammon, involving strategy and a touch of luck from the rolling dice. The clacking of the pieces, the thoughtful silences, the occasional triumph, or the good-natured teasing that accompanied a lost game, these small interactions were the very fabric of family life, building shared memories and strengthening bonds. Even activities as seemingly mundane as knitting, sewing, mending, or woodworking became shared moments. While one person might be absorbed in the rhythmic click of knitting needles, another might be engrossed in a story, and a third perhaps humming along to a quiet tune. These parallel activities, happening in the same space, created a rich, multi-layered environment of productive companionship. Children would often learn these skills by observation, watching the careful movements of their elders, absorbing not just the technique but also the quiet patience and dedication involved. The winter evenings, with their imposed limitations on outdoor activity, were not seen as times of deprivation but rather as opportunities. They fostered a deeper appreciation for the simple, profound pleasures of human connection. The light from a single lamp, whether a candle, an oil lamp, or a fireplace, drew people physically closer, and this physical proximity often mirrored an emotional closeness. In these long, quiet hours, undisturbed by the clamor of the outside world or the incessant demands of modern technology, families found a rhythm that was intrinsically their own. These shared moments of storytelling, music-making, and quiet games were not merely ways to pass the time. They were essential threads woven into the communal fabric, strengthening familial bonds and providing deep comfort. In a world where the elements could be harsh and the future uncertain, these evenings offered a sanctuary, a haven of warmth and belonging. They underscored the power of human voice, the beauty of shared sound, and the quiet joy of focused interaction. These were the moments that provided solace against the winter's gloom, transforming the coldest, darkest season into a time of intimate warmth and enduring connection, etched into the hearts and minds of all who experienced them. Tonight, we drift back to a quiescent time, a time when the world was perhaps a little quieter, a little darker, and certainly a lot colder for those who lived within its embrace. We will explore the ingenious and often deeply personal ways families navigated the very real challenges of winter, long before the ubiquitous glow of electricity promised instant warmth and light. I invite you to settle into your most comfortable space, perhaps dimming the lights, allowing a profound sense of tranquility to wash over you, much like a gentle snowfall softening the edges of the world. Should you find a quiet solace in these old tales tonight, a simple like and subscribe would be a most appreciated gesture. As the days of autumn dwindled, surrendering to the encroaching chill, an unspoken quiet understanding settled within homes that the coming months held not only the beauty of snow and the promise of repose but also a very real, very tangible threat to well-being. The winter, with its long nights and biting winds, brought with it a distinct host of ailments, transforming sniffles into serious complications with an unsettling swiftness. It was a time when the professional medical care we now consider readily accessible was often a distant luxury, a service perhaps many miles away, across treacherous, snowbound roads, or simply beyond the financial means of most families. The doctor, a figure revered and respected, was a visitor of last resort for many, summoned when all else had truly failed, or when a situation had escalated beyond the reach of familial wisdom. In this landscape of limited external support, the home itself became a sanctuary of healing, a repository of generations of accumulated knowledge, whispered from grandmothers to mothers, from mothers to daughters, passed down like precious heirlooms. It was within these warm, often dimly lit spaces that the battle against winter's illnesses was primarily fought, waged with a deep reliance on the natural world, on the understanding of herbs and roots, and on a profound appreciation for the subtle powers of the earth. These were not merely superstitions, they were a meticulously observed and refined system of folk medicine, born from centuries of trial and error, of close observation of nature's remedies. The garden, though dormant under a blanket of snow, often held the dried remnants of summer's bounty, carefully harvested and stored for precisely these lean months. Bundles of herbs hung from rafters, their subtle fragrances mingling with the scent of wood smoke and simmering stews, each leaf and stem carefully selected for its particular healing property. Chamomile, with its delicate, almost ethereal scent, was renowned for its calming properties, brewed into a soothing tea to settle restless children, to ease anxieties, or to encourage a peaceful night's sleep when fever made slumber elusive. A warm cup of chamomile tea, sweetened perhaps with a spoonful of honey, was a gentle balm for a troubled spirit and a tender throat. Peppermint, with its invigorating menthol aroma, was another staple, prized for its ability to clear nasal passages and ease digestive discomfort. A strong peppermint infusion, sipped slowly, could feel like a small victory against the constricting feeling of a head cold, the vapor rising and clearing pathways that felt stubbornly blocked. For coughs, particularly those that lingered and rasped, a potent concoction made from horehound leaves was often prepared. This herb, with its slightly bitter taste, was known for its expectorant qualities, helping to loosen mucus and bring relief to congested lungs. It might be combined with honey and a touch of lemon, creating a syrup that was both medicinal and, in its own way, a small comfort, a sticky sweetness coating a sore throat. The humble onion and garlic, ever present in the kitchen, transcended their culinary roles to become powerful allies in the fight against infection. Sliced onions, placed strategically around a sick room, were believed by some to absorb illness from the air, a practice rooted in the ancient understanding of these bulbs' potent antimicrobial properties. Garlic, often crushed and steeped in honey or oil, was a celebrated decongestant and antibiotic, eaten raw by the brave, or simmered into broths and poultices to draw out infections. The pungent scent, though strong, was a reassuring signal that powerful medicine was at work. Beyond specific herbs, there was a holistic approach to care, an understanding that warmth, rest, and simple nourishment were fundamental pillars of recovery. Warm compresses, made from cloth steeped in hot water or herbal infusions, were applied to aching joints, swollen glands, or chests burdened by coughs, the moist heat offering immediate, penetrating relief. Vapors, created by adding herbs like eucalyptus or thyme to boiling water and inhaling the steam under a towel, were potent allies against congestion, clearing airways and easing troubled breathing. These simple rituals, performed with tenderness and patience, were as much about comfort as they were about cure. The matriarch of the household, often the grandmother or mother, served as the primary caregiver, her hands skilled in preparing poultices of flax seed or mustard to draw out inflammation, her knowledge deeply ingrained concerning which herbs to gather, how to prepare them, and in what dosage. She understood the subtle signs of illness, the changes in a child's breathing, the flush of a fever, the languor of fatigue, and she responded with a calm assurance born of long experience. Her home doctrines were not written in textbooks but etched into the fabric of daily life, passed down through observation and oral tradition. For aches and pains, a winter commonality, infusions of willow bark, containing natural salicylates, precursors to modern aspirin, were brewed to ease discomfort and reduce fever. A soothing bath, imbued with Epsom salts or dried lavender, was believed to draw out toxins and calm agitated nerves, transforming a simple cleansing into a restorative ritual. Balms and salves, often made with beeswax and infused with medicinal herbs like comfrey or calendula, were gently rubbed into sore muscles or chapped skin, providing a protective and healing layer against the harsh winter elements. These homemade preparations, created with careful intention, were more than just remedies, they were acts of care, expressions of love. Even the simple act of preparing nourishing broths took on a therapeutic dimension. Long-simmered bone broths, rich in minerals and comforting to a weary stomach, were considered vital for restoring strength and warmth to the body during illness. Chicken broth, often called Jewish penicillin, was universally valued for its restorative powers, its warmth spreading through the body like a gentle, healing wave. These were not just meals, they were medicine, consumed slowly, savored for their deeply restorative qualities. In this era, without the readily available pharmaceutical solutions we know today, families relied on a blend of practical knowledge, inherited wisdom, and an intimate connection to the natural world. They understood that the earth, in its quiet generosity, provided many of the answers to their ailments. The remedies might have been simple, but their effectiveness was deeply rooted in generations of empirical observation, in the quiet understanding that nature held profound healing powers, waiting to be unlocked by those who knew how to listen. The home, therefore, was not just a shelter from the external cold, it was a vibrant, living center of care, a testament to resilience, and a quiet beacon of hope against the formidable challenges that winter presented. Tonight, we drift back to a time before the hum of electricity, to an era where the harsh breath of winter was met with resourcefulness, where survival was woven into the very fabric of daily life. As you settle in, perhaps dimming the lights, finding your most comfortable spot, let your mind gently unfurl with the quiet rhythm of this narrative. If, by the end, you find a gentle peace, a quiet calm, then perhaps a like and a subscription would be a lovely gesture. And so, as we continue our journey through these long-ago winters, we come now to a rather living, breathing aspect of homestead survival, an element whose presence often meant the difference between enduring hardship and succumbing to it. We speak, of course, of the animal kingdom, those creatures whose existence was so intricately interwoven with human life, not merely as providers, but in a profound sense, as fellow inhabitants whose very warmth offered solace against the biting cold. Imagine, if you will, the intimate proximity during those deep winter months. Unlike today, where our modern farms often house animals in structures far removed from human dwellings, the homesteads of old frequently had barns and byres nestled incredibly close to the family home, sometimes even physically connected to it. This arrangement was not merely for convenience, though ease of access during blizzards was certainly a consideration. It was a deliberate strategy, a practical, almost symbiotic relationship designed to harness the natural warmth radiating from these living creatures. The cows, with their substantial bodies, generated a considerable amount of heat, their internal furnace working continuously to sustain their own lives. This warmth, gentle and steady, would permeate the air within the barn, taking the edge off the bitter outdoor temperatures. Similarly, the sheep, with their thick woolly fleeces, were marvelously insulated, yet their aggregated body heat, when gathered within a confined space, contributed significantly to the ambient temperature. One could almost feel the subtle rise in warmth as one stepped from the frozen air into the enclosed space shared with a small herd. Pigs, too, despite their often muddy disposition, were efficient heat producers. Their sheer body mass and metabolic activity meant that a sty, even a simple one, could be several degrees warmer than the exposed air outside. And the chickens, though individually small, in their collective coops, created their own tiny microclimates of subtle warmth, a testament to the power of numbers. This biological heating system was invaluable. It meant that the well water in the barn might be less likely to freeze solid, that tools stored within could be handled without the excruciating shock of metal on frigid skin, and crucially, that the animals themselves remained healthier, less susceptible to the illnesses that extreme cold could bring. A healthy animal was a productive animal, and their ongoing well-being was paramount to the family's survival. Beyond this intrinsic warmth, the contribution of livestock to sustaining a family through winter was multifaceted and deeply ingrained in the daily rhythms. Consider the dairy cow, a veritable larder on hooves. Through the spring and summer, she provided fresh milk, which could be churned into butter, a rich source of fat and calories, or made into cheese, a preserved food that would last for many months. As winter approached, the production might slow, but the accumulated stores of butter and cheese, carefully wrapped and stored in cool cellars, became essential dietary staples. The milk, even in lesser quantities, offered a fundamental nourishment, a vital warmth when warmed and consumed on a frigid morning. The cream, separated from the milk, provided not only butter but also a source of richness for simple gruels and porridges, transforming a plain meal into something more sustaining and satisfying. Then there were the sheep, those quiet providers of warmth and sustenance. Their wool, shorn in the warmer months, was an indispensable commodity. Every fiber was precious. It was painstakingly cleaned, carded, spun into yarn, and then knitted or woven into garments. Imagine the comforting weight of a hand-spun, hand-knitted woolen shawl, a thick pair of socks, or a sturdy blanket, offering protection against the pervasive chill of an unheated room. These woolen goods were not luxuries, they were vital armor against frostbite and hypothermia, passed down through generations, repaired and re-repaired until their very threads gave out. The lanolin, the natural grease in the wool, also offered a degree of water resistance, making these garments even more effective against damp cold. And of course, the meat. The autumn slaughter was a critical event, a grim but necessary ritual that secured the family's protein supply for the coming lean months. Animals that had grazed and fattened through the summer were culled, their meat carefully processed and preserved. Smoking, salting, and curing were the primary methods, transforming fresh flesh into provisions that would not spoil. Hams, bacon, sausages, and salted beef hung in cool, dry places, often in the smokehouse or a dedicated larder, awaiting their turn to provide vital nutrients through the deep winter. Every part of the animal was utilized, minimizing waste. Fat was rendered into lard for cooking, greasing tools, or even making candles and soap. Bones were boiled down for nourishing broths and soups, extracting every last bit of goodness and flavor. The hides were tanned and transformed into leather for boots, harnesses, and countless other essential items, enduring and resilient. Pigs, in particular, were champions of preservation. Their fatty meat cured beautifully, providing a dense source of calories and flavor. A properly cured ham could last for months, a testament to the effectiveness of these ancient preservation techniques. Even the blood from slaughtered animals was often utilized, made into blood sausages, a nutrient-rich food that prevented waste. Poultry, while perhaps not providing the bulk of meat that larger animals did, offered a steady, smaller contribution. Chickens, durable and relatively self-sufficient, provided not only their meat but also invaluable eggs. Though egg production might diminish in the darkest, coldest days, any egg was a welcome addition, a compact powerhouse of protein, easily stored for a time in sand or ashes, or simply consumed fresh. Geese and ducks, often kept for their meat and fat, also offered down and feathers, which were used to stuff pillows and warm bedding, adding another layer of essential insulation against the night's cold. The care of these animals was, therefore, not a mere chore but an integral part of the family's winter resilience. Each morning, navigating through snowdrifts, perhaps by the faint glow of a lantern, someone would tend to the animals. This meant providing feed, often stored in large quantities from the previous harvest, hay for the ruminants, grain for the fowl and pigs. It meant ensuring fresh, non-frozen water, often a challenging task in sub-zero temperatures, requiring trips to the well and careful monitoring of troughs. It involved clearing manure, which, incidentally, also generated a subtle heat as it composted, and could later be spread on the fields in spring, enriching the soil for the next season's crops. This daily commitment was unwavering. The animals were utterly dependent on their human caretakers, and the humans, in turn, were utterly dependent on the animals. It was a cycle of mutual survival, a silent contract forged through necessity and shared adversity. Their presence was a constant, living reminder of the resources at hand, a quiet assurance amidst the desolate grandeur of a snow-covered landscape. So, as we imagine these scenes, perhaps we can almost feel the gentle warmth radiating from the sturdy bodies of cows in a close-set barn, perhaps smell the faint, earthy scent of hay and livestock, a smell not unpleasant but rather redolent of life and persistence. The animal kingdom, in its humble yet profound way, was not just a collection of resources, but an active, breathing, warming presence, a vital thread in the intricate tapestry of human survival through the long, silent winters of a time before electricity. Their very breath, their very heartbeat, contributed to the small, precious pockets of warmth that allowed families to endure until the first hopeful hints of spring arrived once more. Tonight, we gently glide back in time, to a world where the rhythms of life were deeply intertwined with the turning of the seasons, a world before the hum of electricity illuminated our nights and warmed our homes with a flick of a switch. As you settle into your most comfortable place, perhaps dimming the lights to a soft glow, I invite you to close your eyes, or simply let your gaze soften, and allow my words to weave a gentle tapestry around you. We embark on a journey tonight, exploring how families, through the silent centuries, navigated the profound challenges of winter without our modern conveniences. If you find gentle solace in these historical whispers, please consider offering a quiet like or subscribing, allowing more curious minds to discover these tranquil journeys. And so, as we float back into that long-ago winter, past the deep cold and the endless tasks, we arrive at a subtle, yet immensely powerful, aspect of their endurance, the quiet, unwavering anticipation of spring's return. Through the very deepest, most biting months, when the fires burned endlessly and the snow lay thick and unmoving across the land, covering every familiar path and softening every sharp edge, the fragile, yet unyielding, spark of hope for spring provided a profound psychological sustenance. It was not merely a physical yearning for warmth, but a deep, inherent human need for renewal, for the cyclical promise that life would, indeed, burst forth again from the frozen earth. Imagine those long, dark mornings, when the dawn was late to arrive and the air within the small, timbered house still held the chill of night, even after hours of careful stoking the hearth. The adults would stir, perhaps with a sigh that was less about weariness and more about the sheer persistence of the cold. But even in that hushed awakening, there was the faintest undercurrent of expectation. For every passing day, no matter how incrementally, was drawing them closer to that glorious moment of melting, of softening, of the earth awakening. The children, too, felt this almost visceral pull. Perhaps, while huddled around the storyteller in the evenings, their small hands warmed by the nearest flame, their minds drifted to the forbidden fields, imagining the vibrant greens that would eventually replace the stark white. They might whisper about the birds that would soon return, their songs a bright counterpoint to the wind's low moan, or about the first tiny buds on the fruit trees, promising the sweetness of summer to come. These quiet daydreams were not mere escapism, they were a vital emotional reservoir, filled with the simple, profound joys that awaited them. The smallest, most subtle signs were observed with a keenness that modern, electrified lives rarely afford. The sun, even when shrouded by thick clouds or diffused by falling snow, began to trace a slightly higher arc across the southern sky. Each afternoon, as the chores wound down and the remaining daylight quickly faded, there would be a communal, unspoken recognition that the light had lingered just a few moments longer than the day before. These lengthening daylight hours, so minuscule as to be almost imperceptible to a less attuned modern eye, were eagerly awaited. They were measured not by clocks, but by the fading glow on a western windowpane, or the point at which the shadows stretched across the floorboards. A grandmother, perhaps, with eyes that had seen countless winters come and go, might quietly remark, "The days are drawing out now, aren't they?" And this simple utterance, spoken with a quiet confidence that transcended the present cold, would ripple through the small family, a gentle balm to weary spirits. It was an affirmation, a promise whispered from generation to generation, that the season of darkness held no true victory. The farmers, whose lives were so intimately bound to the land, would walk the snow-covered fields, their boots crunching softly on the frozen crust, not in despair, but with a strategic gaze. They would note the precise depth of the snowpack, understanding its protective qualities for the dormant soil beneath, and envisioning the eventual spring thaw that would replenish the earth's thirst. Their observations were a practiced ballet between patience and planning, a quiet acknowledgement of the natural timetable. Indoors, as the women continued their endless tasks of mending and weaving, preparing the household for the year ahead, their conversations might slowly shift from the immediate necessities of fuel and food preservation to the seeds they would soon plant, the herbs they would sow, and the garden plots that would soon demand their attention. The very act of preparing these seeds, sorting them from last year's harvest, carefully storing them in dry places, was an act of profound faith. Each tiny, dormant seed was a miniature vessel of future life, a tangible representation of spring's indomitable spirit. There might also be a shift in the soundscape of the home. The persistent whistling of the wind around the eaves, which had been a constant companion through the deepest months, might begin to intersperse with the drip of melting icicles from the roof on a slightly warmer afternoon. This silver music, a gentle cadence of water finding its way downwards, was a precursor, a delicate promise that the great thaw was indeed nearing. Even the way the frost pattern clung to the window panes, once thick and impenetrable, might begin to show subtle signs of weakening, thinning in places, allowing a faint peek of the outside world, blurred but present. The anticipation was not a frenetic, impatient longing, but a deep, settled expectation, woven into the very fabric of their being. It was born of necessity, certainly, but also of an ancient, intuitive understanding of the earth's cycles. Families knew, with an understanding far deeper than conscious thought, that this cycle of death and rebirth was the very pulse of life itself. And in that knowing, in that patient, observant waiting, they found immense comfort and a quiet strength to persevere through whatever further trials the tail end of winter might yet bring forth. The hope for spring was not a fleeting fancy, it was the quiet, burning ember that kept their spirits warm, a silent prayer echoing through the darkest hours, for the triumphant return of light and life. Tonight, we drift back to a time when the rhythm of life was dictated by the seasons, a time when the cold embrace of winter was a pervasive reality, and the arrival of spring was not just a change, but a profound release. Settle in softly, perhaps dimming your lights, allowing your mind to drift and unwind. If you find yourself soothed by these quiet stories, a gentle tap of the like button, or a quiet subscription, would be a welcome way to share your solace with us. As the days stretched with imperceptible slowness, each additional minute of light a precious gift, there came a nuanced shift in the air, a subtle relaxation of winter's vice-like grip. It was not a sudden, dramatic awakening, but a gradual, quiet stirring, almost like a sleeping giant beginning to stretch after a very long slumber. The first true signs of thawing were often understated, whispered anticipations rather than boisterous announcements. It began with a softness in the sunlight perhaps, a quality to the light that promised warmth even when the air remained crisp and biting. The deep, pristine snow, which had for so long insulated the world in a blanket of white, commenced its slow, deliberate transformation. It was no longer the dry, powdery snow of midwinter, but rather acquired a slightly damp sheen, a subtle glimmer that bespoke an internal change. Small rivulets, almost invisible at first, would trace delicate paths across the hardened crust, finding their way to depressions in the landscape. These were the very first whispers of melting, the initial delicate threads of water reclaiming their liquid form. For families who had endured months of intense cold and restricted movement, these subtle cues were imbued with immense significance. Each hint of thaw was a direct message of hope, an assurance that the relentless battle against the elements was reaching its culmination. The psychological burden of winter, the constant vigilance against cold, the limited resources, the relative isolation, all of these pressures began, ever so gently, to recede. It was a shared exhale, a collective easing of tension that permeated every household. The looming threat of deep winter, of bone-penetrating cold and unforgiving storms, began to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of relief, a burgeoning anticipation of renewal. The soundscape of the world subtly shifted as well. The profound silence of a truly frozen winter, often broken only by the sharp crack of ice or the howl of the wind, slowly gave way to new, liquid sounds. The gentle drip-drip-drip from eaves was perhaps the most iconic, a steady, rhythmic cadence that announced the sun's persistent work. Icicles, which had hung like frozen jewels from every projection, began their slow, graceful surrender, often breaking with a soft, delicate tinkle against the frozen earth below. Beneath the thinning ice on ponds and streams, a faint, gurgling murmur could sometimes be discerned, the sound of water regaining its agency, flowing beneath its still frozen shell. And then, one might begin to notice the subtle aroma of damp earth, a scent that had been locked away beneath layers of snow and ice for so long. It was an earthy, fertile fragrance, carrying with it the promise of growth and productivity. This scent, faint at first, would steadily deepen, growing richer and more pronounced as the sun worked its magic. It was a primal perfume, speaking directly to the deep-seated human connection with the land and its cycles. The resumption of a more expansive outdoor life was not instantaneous, but rather a gradual reacquaintance. Initially, venturing outdoors still required warm clothing, but the purpose of these forays shifted. No longer solely for the urgent collection of fuel or the rapid tending of animals, now there was a cautious venturing out simply to observe, to breathe the changing air. Children, perhaps bundled in layers that still restricted their movement somewhat, would be drawn to the edges of melting snowdrifts, fascinated by the nascent streams and the glint of sunlight on water. They might dabble with sticks in the muddy puddles that formed, feeling the cool, wet earth beneath their clumsy boots. These simple acts were imbued with the joy of rediscovery, the delight of reconnecting with a world that felt new again. For the adults, there was a keen observation of the land itself. The hard-packed snow-covering fields and pathways began to compress, to grow denser, and then, inexorably, to shrink. Patches of brown, withered grass or the dark, rich soil would begin to emerge, like revelations from beneath a shroud. These first exposed patches of earth were examined with care, a silent assessment of the winter's impact, a gauging of the land's readiness for the work that lay ahead. Each new glimpse of bare earth was a victory, a reclaiming of territory from the grasp of winter. The wild creatures, too, began their slow emergence. Tracks in the softening snow might reveal the passage of deer, moving with a slightly less urgent pace, perhaps seeking out the first tender shoots. Birds, whose winter songs had been few and far between, would begin to offer more varied calls, a tentative symphony building with each passing day. A robin's bright breast against the still muted landscape was a truly vivid harbinger, its cheerful chirping a clear announcement that spring was indeed on its way. The sight of these returning or more active creatures was a profound reassurance, a confirmation that the natural world was indeed reawakening, following its ancient and enduring calendar. The land itself began its slow, deliberate awakening. Beneath the soil, roots, which had been in a state of suspended animation, began to absorb the renewed moisture, drawing sustenance, slowly preparing for the great surge of growth. The bare branches of trees, which had stood starkly silhouetted against the winter sky, might exhibit the first, almost imperceptible swelling of buds, tiny promises of emerald green to come. It was a subtle transformation, often missed by the casual observer, but for those whose lives were intimately intertwined with the land, these were profound and moving observations. Faint, earthy odors might carry on the gentle breezes, the smell of damp bark, the subtle fragrance of pine needles that had been frozen and now slowly released their scent. The quality of the light, even on overcast days, had a different character. It felt softer, more diffuse, perhaps reflecting off the increasing moisture in the air. The long shadows of deep winter, stark and unforgiving, began to soften and shorten, dancing with a newfound playfulness. This period of the first thaws was a delicate balance, a borderland between two distinct seasons. It could still turn bitter again, a late snowfall or a sudden drop in temperature reminding everyone of winter's lingering power. But the underlying current was unmistakable, the momentum had shifted. The cold, while still present and indeed often quite sharp, no longer felt insurmountable. It was a cold in retreat, a chill that was being gradually, almost ceremoniously, ushered out by the persistent and gentle urging of the sun and the ever-lengthening days. The relief felt by families was a deep, quiet gratitude, a sense of having navigated another challenging passage. The sheer endurance required to simply survive the winter months, to keep warm, to procure food, to maintain spirits, was immense. The first thaws were a collective reward, a signal that the most arduous part of the journey was complete, and that the promise of more abundant, easier days was steadily approaching. It was a testament to patience, to resilience, and to the enduring human spirit that found hope and beauty in the most subtle of natural shifts. The long hibernation was coming to an end, and with it, the world and its inhabitants were stirring, preparing to embrace the burgeoning life of spring. Tonight, as the embers of our exploration into pre-electric winters gently cool, we softly gather the lingering warmth of the lessons these hardy souls left behind, much like a well-tended fire offering its final, comforting glow. This quiet journey through time has illuminated an enduring spirit, a quiet strength that resonates even in our brightly lit, effortlessly heated world. Make yourself comfortable. Perhaps you might dim the lights a little, allowing a deeper sense of tranquility to settle around you, much as the long night settled around those homesteads of old. If, by the end of our time together, you have found a measure of peace, please consider liking and subscribing so that more weary travelers might find their way to these quiet shores. The self-sufficiency of those pre-electric families was not a celebrated achievement, but a baseline of existence, a gentle hum of capability woven into the fabric of daily life. It was a self-sufficiency born not of choice, but of necessity, yet it fostered a profound sense of competence, a quiet confidence in one's ability to meet the world's demands. Imagine the soft pride in a larder filled with home-canned vegetables, each jar a testament to weeks of patient cultivation and careful preservation. Picture the satisfaction in a neatly stacked woodshed, each log split and piled by hand, promising warmth through the coldest nights. This was not merely survival engineering, but a deeply ingrained ethos, a quiet understanding that provision sprang from effort, from steady hands and a watchful eye. They knew the provenance of their food, felt the texture of the materials that clothed them, and understood the intricate mechanics of the tools that served their daily needs. This intimate knowledge, this tangible connection to the things that sustained them, offered a grounding presence, a serene certainty in a world that often presented stark challenges. There was a quiet dignity in knowing how to mend a torn garment, how to sharpen a dull blade, how to preserve the bounty of summer for the lean months of winter. These were not grand skills taught in academies, but elemental wisdom passed down by example, absorbed through observation, and perfected through diligent practice in the quiet rhythms of home and hearth. Alongside this self-sufficiency bloomed a remarkable resourcefulness, a boundless ingenuity that transformed scarcity into possibility. When a tool broke, it was repaired, often with surprising cleverness. A worn-out blanket might become a new rag rug, a discarded flour sack, a child's chemise. Nothing was truly wasted. Every scrap, every sliver of material, every moment of daylight or warmth was valued, considered, and often repurposed with an artful eye and a practical mind. This resourcefulness was not a frantic scramble, but a deliberate, thoughtful process of adapting what was available to meet an unfolding need. It was the quiet contemplation of how to make a little go a long way, how to extend the life of an object, how to coax warmth from a drafty room. This spirit of innovation was a silent conversation between the individual and their environment, a constant negotiation that honed their problem-solving instincts. They understood the properties of wood, the behavior of ice, the nuances of changing weather, and their solutions were often elegant in their simplicity, born from a deep intuitive knowledge of the world around them. It was a gentle testament to human adaptability, a quiet demonstration that limitations could often, through thoughtful effort, be transformed into opportunities for creative expression. But perhaps most profoundly, these harsh winters, so challenging for the individual family, also forged an indomitable spirit of community. In the face of overwhelming odds, the understanding that one could not, and need not, face them alone became a powerful binding force. Neighbors were not just people living nearby, they were vital threads in the fabric of survival. A barn raising, a quilting bee, the sharing of surplus preserves or precious fuel would during a particularly brutal cold snap, these were not merely social gatherings, but essential acts of mutual aid, rendered with a quiet grace and an unspoken understanding. The strength of the collective was a warm blanket against the cold, a steady hand in times of trouble. Children learned early the unspoken language of helpfulness, the quiet expectation of contributing to the common good. There was a respectful deference to the wisdom of elders, a patient guidance offered to the young, all contributing to a seamless flow of interdependent life. The quiet hum of shared laughter, the murmur of comforting voices, the steady presence of helping hands, these were the rhythms of a community that understood the profound truth that together, they could weather any storm. This collective spirit, this interwoven web of support, was not a boisterous display, but a deep, abiding conviction that their well-being was inextricably linked, that a rising tide indeed lifted all boats, especially those navigating the treacherous waters of a pre-electric winter. These timeless winters also shaped a profound and intimate connection to the seasons, a connection that is, for many of us, now a delicate whisper rather than a resonant song. For them, the passage of the year was a visceral experience, an unfolding drama written on the land and in the sky. The crisp bite of early autumn air signaled the urgent need for harvest. The first heavy snowfall marked a retreat inward, a shift from active to reflective existence. The lengthening days of late winter brought a quiet yearning for spring, a hopeful anticipation of new life. Their lives were meticulously attuned to these natural rhythms, their calendars dictated not by clocks, but by the sun's arc and the moon's phases. They understood the land not as a commodity, but as a living entity that provided and demanded respect. They read the signs in the trees, the patterns in the clouds, the subtle changes in animal behavior, garnering insights crucial for their survival. This deep attunement fostered a humility, an understanding of humanity's place within the larger natural world, not above it. It was a gentle lesson in patience, in acceptance of what nature offered and withheld, and in the enduring beauty of each season's unique character. As we softly close this chapter, and indeed, our exploration of these pre-electric winters, we carry with us the tranquil echoes of these remarkable lives. The self-sufficiency, born of necessity and cultivated with care. The resourcefulness, a quiet dance between challenge and ingenuity. The community spirit, a warm embrace in the face of adversity. And the profound connection to the seasons, a gentle constant in a world of change. These are not relics of a forgotten past, but enduring truths, whispered through the ages, reminding us of the quiet strength and remarkable adaptability that resides within the human spirit. Perhaps a little of their peaceful resilience might gently settle upon us as we drift towards sleep, bringing a sense of calm reassurance to our own modern night. Sweet dreams.